This Korean furniture-inspired coffee table is beautiful, fun, and put me through one of the hardest times of my life. In the span of 6 weeks, I was trying to complete 5 woodworking projects. And once I reached the final week, I still had 2 big projects left. So what that meant was that one of them wasn't getting done. Fortunately, the one I did end up cutting, a dining table project, wasn't due until fall, so I did make the logical decision very clear. I think it just sucked because even though that project didn't need to be finished early, it was the principle of it. I set a tough goal and fell short. In the end, I gave it all I got and did complete 4 out of 5 projects. So yeah, I'm gonna count it as a win. And now let's take things back to the very beginning. About 2 to 3 months before this moment, the coffee table project was originally supposed to be my final cutting board. At some point, my client had seen in one of my videos that I'd made an announcement that I was not going to make any more cutting boards. If you haven't seen it, I basically said that I felt that it was time for me to stretch my wings and pursue the curiosities I have within woodworking as an art. And even though I gave my all to every project and that there's nothing wrong with making cutting boards, for me, making them was not allowing me to push myself as an artist. So when my client saw this, he reached out to me and told me that he wanted to change the project into something that would fulfill me artistically. I first was like, whoa, it's totally okay. I'm completely happy to make this one. Because on the other hand, the cutting board he wanted was already far different than the ones I'd made so far. I asked him to think about it thoroughly, and after he gave it some more thought, he eventually reached back out to say, I thought about it. I want to do something different. How do you feel about making a coffee table instead? His family had just come back from a trip to Korea, and he was wondering if I could make it inspired by some of the traditional Korean designs they saw there. He sent me a handful of pictures that included palaces, older style buildings, and also a few modern places too. I asked him to give me a few days to review them, and after looking through his pictures carefully, I got the sense that he wanted something that captured the older and more traditional Korean furniture vibe. Something distinctly Korean, different from typical everyday sights, relevant to the memories he and his family created, with some modernity to it. I spent the next few days scouring the internet researching older style Korean furniture, and once I started understanding some of the patterns going on, I began to sketch some designs. Older Korean furniture designs have some recurring features within them. Intricate oriental line shapes, showcasing time, detail, and effort. Feet with attached slats, perhaps strength and extra stability. Edges that curves upwards, giving off a sense of royalty and nobility. Legs with that curved cabriole design, a sort of elegance to complement the class. Metal around joints for more contrast and durability, and so much more. With all of these features in mind, along with, of course, the budget and time frame, I came up with the following 2 designs. The first design, which we'll call Design A, features that curved edge top, the cabriole leg design with attached slats, and something called ikgong, which kind of look like wings. I found these present in many older architectural works and felt that they would go well with this particular piece and its dimensions. This design overall was meant to be more heavily traditional and still with a little bit of spunky character. The second design, which we'll call B, I know, very creative, right? is a distinctly different direction. Crisp and straighter lines with instead a hint of that traditional vibe. Modern and more practical to be used in any kind of space. You can even say it was more modular. Yet the subtle nod to that traditional vibe came in the detailed carvings on the side. Something that couldn't be missed but wouldn't distract either. This one was more of a tribute to the modernity that they saw, an opposite of Design A. Once I presented both options to their family, their initial reaction was to see if we could fuse the 2 designs together. He wanted to see if I could take the cutouts from Design B and add them to Design A. Now, in almost every situation before today, I think I would have just said, okay, and went with it. Today was different though. With this project being a piece that he wanted me to express myself as an artist, I felt compelled to tell him how I felt, and so I did. I was hesitant to add the cutouts because within art pieces, I believe there comes a point when adding more features to a design makes things cluttered. Too many features can make nothing stand out. With that big sense of bravery flowing through me, I sent these thoughts to him. And after thinking them over, he replied that he understood and that his wife Julia also agreed with me. Thanks, Julia. Of course, now with the approval of two very intelligent women, we all agreed to move forward with designing, and I got to work. Now usually I would do a build video and talk about what I did along the way. Because of the time crunch though, I asked my partner for much more space so that I could concentrate and move faster. And that, of course, resulted in much less video footage than we normally would have had. So I'll be going over this design a little bit differently, and I'll be curious to know what your thoughts on this video style are in the comments section below. The design on the coffee table is comprised to essentially 6 major steps or parts: the wing, the legs, the body, the tabletop, the finishing, and the installation. To make the wings, I created a template by using a laser cutter and cut tenons to do mortise and tenon joinery. While it might be fun to have 4 wings that are all slightly different, as some might say, embrace the imperfection. I figured that could just be saved for a different kind of project. I did really think about using dowel joints or domino joints for where the wings attach to the body. In the end though, I decided on mortise and tenon joinery because I wanted to have a greater glue surface than what a dowel or domino could give. Plus, it was surprisingly simpler to do. The legs were created similarly to the wings. I made a template using the laser cutter and then used that template to cut 4 identical bases for legs. To smoothen the legs out, I used a round over route a bit on the edges, and once I got it to the shape that I wanted, I used a hand chisel to get into all the tight corners. The other difference between the legs and the wings was the joinery. I wanted the legs to be flush to the front and back of the table, and to do that, I made a rabbet cut on the legs for the table's body to sit in. And I also added dowels to distribute the weight, making it better suited for handling downward stresses. The body was way more complex. The biggest thing I needed to think about was wood movement. With this table, there were 3 points of concern: a horizontal divider between what will be a lift up top and the bottom drawer, the bottom of the drawer itself, and the back panel of the body. The first 2 spots had wood that was going to be trapped completely, and in the third and last spot, even though it wasn't going to be trapped on all 4 sides, it did have different directions of wood movement happening there. To solve these concerns, I decided to eliminate that possibility of wood movement having an effect and use Russian Baltic birch plywood with walnut veneer on top. Besides those 3 parts, the rest of the table is 100% solid walnut. The corners of the body were created using miter joints, and on the back of the body, I created a dado slot on the bottom for the back panel to drop in. The divider between the lift up top and the drawer is supported by dado slots within the table walls as well as the back panel, giving it stability and some good oomph to be able to store things in. The drawer sides are all glued together using rabbet joints, and in order to give it a more seamless and non-distracting look, I used bottom mount drawer slides so that you wouldn't see any hardware when you opened it. My favorite part of the body is the front side. I made a book matching panel to use part of it on the body and the rest for the drawer front. How the transition plays between the table body and the drawer front is just too gorgeous to ignore. The tabletop needed to feature a lift up top and ends that curved upwards, a traditional Korean design element. While I knew I wanted to use breadboards for the end pieces in order to prevent the tabletop from warping over time, I did have some worries as to how I would approach creating the curved shape. In the end, I basically made a bunch of dado cuts on the top side of the breadboard and used a cove router bit to get that smooth curve. Once I glued up the breadboard, I created the bottom curve by cutting a chunk off on the table saw and hand planing the rest. This entire shaping portion went a lot smoother than I initially thought. I think I just ran so many simulations in my head that I was completely ready and prepared for it. Now, with all of those parts finally done, the next major step is the finishing. I needed to do 2 coats of finishing for this project, and this is where it gets interesting. I also needed to start driving to Florida the very next day. So after taking it apart and applying 1 coat at night, I woke up, wrapped it up, loaded into the car, and started driving to Florida, letting it cure while we drove. Once we got halfway to Florida, we stopped by a hotel, loaded all the pieces onto one of those trolley things, and wheeled everything into the hotel room to apply the second coat. Can you imagine how people were looking at us when they saw us lugging in these interesting shapes super late at night? Yeah, it was fun. Doing the second coat in a hotel room was a little tricky. I had to do a little rearranging because the room was kind of tight. And because it didn't have ceiling lights, I also had to get creative by pointing the desk lamp in the room towards it and whipping out a portable light I brought along in order to see it clearly. The finishing I used for this was Odie's oil, and I'd never used Odie's for a bigger project before, so I was was curious as to how it'd feel. And overall, I'd say it felt pretty much the same as it would any other project. I have no idea why I thought it might feel differently. Although, I will say that it was tough at first to get in all the nooks and crannies. In order to better reach those spots, I dampened a rag with Odie's Super Duper oil, and that made quick work of those areas. After a short night's rest, I loaded everything back into the car. Of course, saying hi to everyone along the way. And then we made our final stretch to Florida. The last major step of this project was installation. The first part of this was done before putting the finishing on. The coffee table hardware included the drawer slides and the mechanism for the lift up top. Once all the pieces were in their final stage, I spent a hefty amount of time doing dry fittings and making sure all of the hardware was balanced and level. On any other project, what I typically like to do is put everything together before delivering the final result. Of course, in this case, since I needed to give the second coat enough time to cure as well, I had to do the final installation of all the parts and hardware in my client's home. Where we left off in the story earlier was us driving to Florida. And when we arrived, we spent the evening and morning working on the very next YouTube video, which was at the time the build video for a CN table. Working on the video while on the road was very difficult, by the way. Things were a little slower, there were lots of unknowns like cars and neighbors being loud, and also odd placements of power sockets, which was also limiting for how it worked. I think we need more practice traveling to get used to this, if you know what I mean. Working on the videos gave the finishing more time to cure, and once we finally drove the rest of the way to my client's home, I spent about an hour assembling all the hardware in their living room, and then the Korean-inspired coffee table was finally done. The coolest part of this process was that I got to hang out with and meet my client and his family. We ate dinner at their place, fed the fishes in their pond, and also shared lots of stories back and forth about our adventures and travels. This was a nice little calm in the middle of all the madness. Everything slowed down and I got to just relax a bit, even if it was just for a couple of hours. Starting with social media and posting my adventures, stories, and thoughts gave me a chance to connect with people and vice versa. And even so, it feels very difficult sometimes to really get a chance to say hello. This moment was enjoyable for that reason. A family that had been following along my journeys and believed in what I was doing. It meant a lot for me to be able to make something for them. And imbued within the piece is a wish for this coffee table to stay with them for many years, generations even. And after a wonderful evening, my partner and I hit the road again. Because we had more nights with very little sleep ahead of us, we needed to get back to Houston, pack everything up, and then drive to Dallas to catch a flight to Korea. Zach and Julia, thank you so much for giving me the chance to make this table for you. It's meant a lot for me that I was able to create something with a lot of meaning and memories attached to it. Above that, of course, thank you so much for inviting me to have dinner with you and getting a chance to connect and take what could normally be a simple transaction and transforming it into a memory that we'll be able to have for as long as we can remember. There are so many things that I am excited to catch you all up with that I am barely able to contain myself about it. So, before I accidentally start to give spoilers about things, I wanted to give a quick shout out to my newest Patreon members, Brian, Willie, and Craig. Thank you all so much for your support, and if you too are wanting to support this channel, do consider Patreon as an option. Last but not least, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.